All right, parents, don't panic. I'm going to give you the out with the concubine. So. All right, we're going to read it again because I paraphrased for the kids, but let's jump into Judges 19, just starting in verse 1, and we'll take it from the top. So in those days, there was no king in Israel. A certain Levite was sojourning, traveling in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. All right, and so, again, the Levite wasn't supposed to be up in Ephraim. He's supposed to be ministering in the house of Shiloh. Why did he take himself a concubine? Is that God's design? No, God said, let there be a man and a woman, and let them be married. Let it be his wife. But these guys had come up with another system of having wives on the sides with less privileges and less abilities within the relationship because they thought that was right in their own eyes. All right, is that God's plan? No, it wasn't God's plan. God's plan was for a man to marry a wife and for her to become one with him, to complete him in perfection. But these guys have come up with a system to say we can have concubines on the side and they'll be more like property. And so was the Levite doing right by her when he made her his concubine? No. All right, so that's the very beginning of the relational problems within that. She was like a second-class wife. God's design was for her to be a helpmate, a completer of the Levite. All right, so number one, he messed up there. So she cheated on him. We read that part. She went back to her father's house, and he, by law, could have had her, one, put away quietly and left her at her father's house, or taken it to the extreme and had her stoned. All right? So we weren't going to share that part with the kids, but they probably already know it because that's what Joseph had the ability to do with Mary. He could either had her stoned or put her away quietly, and he said, I'm just going to put her away quietly until the angel of the Lord appeared to him. So this Levite has taken the high road and letting her go away quietly, but instead of leaving her there, God ministered to his heart, and he said, you know what? I'm going to make this relationship right. Even though it's not completely right because she's my concubine and not my wife, I'm going to forgive her. I'm going to go back and make it right and restore that relationship and bring her back to Ephraim with me. And when she shows up at the father's house, the father's elated. He brings him into the house, and they throw a party. Verse 4, father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. So it's good things going on, all right? The eating and drinking is actually a party. It's a reunion party. It's a celebration, and they're doing this for 3 days. Verse 5, on the 4th day they rose early in the morning, and the Levite prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go. So verse 6, the two of them ate and drank together, and the girl's father said to the man, be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man rose to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again, the 4th night. Verse 8, on the 5th day, he arose early in the morning to depart. The girl's father said, strengthen your heart and wait until the day declines. So they ate, both of them. I could not read this story without reminding myself of a story that my father-in-law told me one time when I was sitting in the driveway, waiting to drive back to New Orleans for an 11-hour trip, and it's getting late. And the later it got, the more impatient I got. And I'm like, we got 11 hours to travel. And this was the routine. Every time we get in the car, we'd forget something, or wait, there's a pound cake we got to go get. And we go get the pound cake and we bring it back out. And we had gone through this scenario several times, but I had just never really dealt with it very well. And I was sitting in the driver's seat, like revving the engine, like we got to go. We got 11 hours in front of us. And my father-in-law walked out to me and I rolled down the window and he goes, Jimmy, let me just tell you something. It was like this every time we tried to leave Gaga's house when we were living in Louisiana. So you know what? Just embrace it. Just go with it. Relax. And know that it's out of love that we don't want you to go back. We're not trying to mess up your life or keep you on the road late. And I never forget that. And so fast forward 28 years. Bradley's home last week, right? And he goes, I'm going to go home Friday night. And I'm like, how about we go out, do something Friday night, and you just go back Saturday? I'm that guy. He's like, okay. So we made plans Friday night, and he got up, or Friday night, we got up Saturday, and he was like, you could hang out this morning and kind of go later in the day. And I'm like, I really am that guy. I'm that dude doing to my son, and I'm sure we'll do it to Brett and Becca when they come, but it's out of love. And so this father-in-law sincerely just wanted this Levite and his daughter to hang out. And they'd hang out for 3 days, and then by the 4th day, the guy's like, we really need to get going. The father's like, just stay one more day. And then we're on the 5th day, and the father-in-law says, you know what, let's just eat and drink and have a good time, and you can leave later on this afternoon. And that's exactly what's going on in this scenario. Out of love, I really want you to continue to be in my house. I don't want you to go away. So in verse 8, the girl's father said, strengthen your heart, wait until the day declines. So they ate both of them. Verse 9, when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said, behold, now the day has waned towards evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day will draw to a close. Lodge here and let your heart be merry. And tomorrow, the 6th day, you shall arise early in the morning for your journey to go home. And so now we're on the 5th day. It's getting late, and the Levite's like, we got to get going. We should have been gone 3 days ago. And Dad's like, just stay one more day. But in verse 10, the man would not spend the night. He rose up, departed, and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem, because he had with him a couple of saddle donkeys, and his concubine was with him. And when they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over, and the servant said, come now, let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites and spend the night. And the master said to him, we will not turn aside into the cities of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah. So they leave, but they leave late. And it's getting towards evening. And one thing you don't want to do in Israel when the day of the judges of everyone doing what's right in their own eyes is travel at night. And so it's getting close to dusk. They're coming up on Jebus, which is called Jerusalem. We'll tell you why it's called Jebus in a second. And the servant has got some common sense, and he's like, Master, we need to pull off the road and go into Jebus, which is Jerusalem, because it's getting dark, and we do not want to be traveling at dark. And the master says, we are not going to stay in Jebus because they are a bunch of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel. We're going to Gibeah, because in Gibeah, those are Israelites. Those are our people. And we're going to go to our people. We're not staying with foreigners. So you got to say, why is Jerusalem a city of foreigners? Isn't Jerusalem like the place for Israel? Well, if you go back to Judges or Joshua, when it says that the tribe of Judah went into Jerusalem to take over Jerusalem, they hit a roadblock by the Jebusites. And they weren't able to drive out the Jebusites. So they said, okay, we're going to leave them there. But if the Israelites, the tribe of Judah, had done exactly what God told them to when they took the city of Jerusalem, guess what? There wouldn't have been any Jebusites at all. But they didn't want to put up the extra fight to drive these people out of Jerusalem. So they just said, you know what? No harm, no foul. We'll leave you there and just don't cause a trouble. And you can carry our water, and you can grind our grain, and you can do things for us. Just don't give us issues. And instead of doing it God's way, the people of Israel did what was right in their own eyes, and they took the low road, and they said, we're not going to drive out the Jebusites, we're going to leave them in Jerusalem. And so now the Jebusites are inhabiting in Jerusalem, and they're the reason this Levite doesn't want to stay in Jerusalem, because he discriminates against the Jebusites. He's like, I don't like those people, they're foreigners, they shouldn't even be in Jerusalem. We are not staying the night in Jerusalem. We're going to Gibeah. So the servant's like, all right, you're the master. Verse 13, he said to the young man, come and let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or Ramah. So now he's kind of opening it up, going, okay, we may not go to Gibeah. If Ramah's closer, we'll go to Ramah. So they passed on and went on their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and to spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into their house to spend the night. And so they make it to Gibeah. They don't go to Ramah. And in Gibeah, it's the tribe of Benjamin. It's his people, all right? But they go into the city square, into the town circle, and by hospitality culture, anybody that's staying in the city square as night falls, are supposed to be invited into the house. Because hospitality of this culture says nobody stays in the city square by themselves out in the open because there's thieves, there's wild animals, there's all kinds of trouble. And so the norm, cultural norm, would be that anybody that's in the city square should be invited into somebody's home. But now it's nighttime, nobody's invited them in, and they're kind of stuck. And I'm sure the servant's going, great idea, Mr. Levite. And the Levite's kind of going, but this is weird because these are my people, and they should be offering us hospitality. But they weren't. Verse 16. Behold, an old man was coming in from his work in the field at evening, and the man was from the hill country of Ephraim. And he was sojourning in Gibeah. The men of the place were the Benjamites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going? And where did you come from? And the Levite said to him, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into the house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and my female servant, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything. And the old man said, peace be to you. I will care for you and all your wants, only do not spend the night in the square. So he brought him into his house and gave the donkey feed, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. And so after nobody in Gibeah invited these guys into their house, this old dude from the field comes in, and he's like, well, I'm not really from here. I'm from up in Ephraim. And the Levite's like, well, I'm from Ephraim too. It's like, now they got some common bond. And the guy from Ephraim, the old man's like, nobody's invited you into their house. And they're like, no, we're kind of stuck out here in the square. And he goes, well, don't worry about it. And the guy interrupts him. He goes, no, look, we've got enough feed for ourselves and our donkeys. We've got wine. We've got food. We don't need anything for ourselves. Actually, we've got enough food to feed your servants. And the old man's like, we'll have none of that, because he's a hospitality dude. And he's like, you come into my house, and I'll take care of all your needs. You put your donkeys into my barn, I'll take care of their needs. I will take care of you, and the last thing you need to do is be staying outside here. And so he brings them into his house. He does what's customarily normal. He washes their feet from their travels. He refreshes them. They eat and they drink. And this is kind of the eating and the drinking that the father-in-law was doing. It's a little bit of a party. It's a little bit of a celebration. The Ephraimites have come together in the town of Gibeah, and they're having a great time until verse 22. They're making their hearts merry. Behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man is come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do to them what seems good to you, but against this man do not do this outrageous thing. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them, and they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as the morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And so now this story takes a crazy U-turn, because two Ephraimites have been united. They've been brought together. They're in a safe environment. They're in a good place. They're having a little party. And then all of a sudden, there's this crazy rumbling outside of the door. And it's the men of the city of Gibeah. And they're beating on the door, and they're screaming, let us have that dude that's in your house. And everybody goes, man, this is a flashback to Sodom and Gomorrah. This is like Genesis 19 relived over all again. And they're beating on the door, and the old man's like, I got to do something. They're going to beat my door down. So he goes out to them, and he says, look, you can't do this. This is like a horrible idea. Number one, they're my guests. And because they're my guests, they're under my care. And if I violate that care, I'm sinning not against just them, I'm sinning against God. But then he comes up with this brilliant idea, because everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. And he says, let me give you guys an alternative solution. Why don't I send my virgin daughter out and this guest of mine's concubine, and you can do whatever you want to them. And then he starts giving them ideas. You can violate them. You can abuse them. You can do whatever you want to them. Just leave my guest alone. But they're not having it. 25, the men would not listen to him. So then it says the man seized his concubine. Well, who's got a concubine? The Levite. The Levite's the one with the concubine. And as he's hearing this, what's transpiring outside the door, he starts putting two together that if this crowd, this mob of men who want to know him, all right, and that's a marital no, are not going to buy this old man's deal of taking his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine, then he knows what's after that. And it's him going outside and being known by these dudes. And so he panics. And he panics in 25 after the men would not listen to the old man. The Levite seizes his concubine and made her go out to them. And so he does a quick snatch and grab. The old man's out front negotiating with the mob. His concubine's with him. They're hearing what's going on. The dude opens the door. He snatches the old man. He brings him in. He throws his concubine out to him, and he shuts the door. And then he must go to bed. Why? Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the story, the children's version. Why did the Levite go down to Bethlehem in the first place? Because he really, really, really wanted to restore a relationship that was broken, in which she had cheated on him, and he wanted to make it right. He wanted to speak kindly to her heart. He wanted to bring reconciliation. He wanted to bring a husband's love that was broken because she was a concubine, but to do the best he could, he wanted to bring that relationship back together. How do you go from that to 6 days later, he's feeding her to a mob of guys that wants to rape him? How does that transpire so quickly? And the only thing you can come up with is this dude panicked because his life or his virginity is on the line. And he knows that if he goes out the door, he's not going to come back the same. And so he panics. And he basically takes what he has said he wants to entrust, what he wants to care for, what he wants to make right, and he feeds her to this mob. And then he shuts himself behind the doors, and he basically goes back to bed. How do you get from there to here? And the only justification would be he panicked. He didn't know what else to do. And when he was faced with me or her, he chose him. He chose self. He chose self-preservation. He chose, I don't want to experience what's out that door, and I don't care what her experience is going to be. I just don't want that to be me. And he did the quick sidestep. And he did in that flash what he thought was right in his own eyes. And ended up being a horrible choice. A choice that's going to have ramifications across the whole nation, which we'll find out next week. But in that split decision, because he hadn't predetermined what would happen at that split decision, he chose self. And that's exactly what we choose when we get caught into a situation where it's either us or somebody else. If we haven't predetermined that it's not going to be us, that we're going to take the high road and we're going to let it be somebody else, we're going to protect them, we're going to do whatever we need to get them to be safe, and we're going to put ourselves out there. But we don't know until it happens. Like, we can talk all day long. Oh, man, I'd never do such a thing, right? Until it happens, and you do such a thing, and you're like, how did that even come across? Because the natural man is going to self-preserve. That's fight or flight. That's how we're designed. And to supersede the natural man has to be a supernatural input. And the only way that supernatural input can happen is not at the reaction of that incident. It's a predetermined, I want to choose differently. But that Levite hadn't done that. And so he fed his concubine to the crowd at the expense of her. Just like the old man was willing to give her daughter and the concubine. And so he's got to say, well, what does that look like for me? Which brings us back to the first 3 or 4 verses. Because the guy determined in his heart he was going to forgive and restore and make that relationship right. But when it all went south, that really wasn't his motivation. His motivation was me. Because he hadn't dealt with the me part. Next week we're going to read in Judges 20 when he tells a crowd of the tribes of Israel what happened. He said, "The leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead." This is his account of what happened. We're going to read it next week, but fast forward. Levi, what happened to your concubine? Well, let me tell you how it went down. The leaders of Gibeah rose against me. They surrounded the house against me. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she's dead. Is that the whole story? No, it doesn't even look like the story. But in his head, who was it about? Him. It was about, they were coming after me, and they were surrounding the house for me, and they were going to kill me. So there's a big jump between that and then they violated my concubine, and she's dead. How did they get to the concubine? He kind of left out the whole swap thing, right? And then I fed her to the crowd, and they violated her and killed her. He didn't tell her that part. No. They turned from me and got my concubine, and then they killed my concubine. So in his head, he has already justified this thing away. Because it's the crowd and him, and then the casualties of war is this concubine. But now he wants the tribes of Israel to justify this whole scenario, even though they don't have all the facts. Now, what does Jesus say about this whole thing? Philippians 2. Jesus says if there's any consolation in Christ, we've got any comfort in Jesus, if there's any comfort in his love, if there's any fellowship of the Spirit, if you're communing with the Spirit, if you're walking with the Spirit, if you're being guided by the Spirit, if there's any affection in your heart, if there's any mercy in your heart, fulfill my joy. That's the joy of Christ. It was the joy that was set before him in what? The resurrection? No. It was the joy that was set before him in the cross. And fulfill that joy by being like-minded and having the same love. And so Jesus is saying, look, if you've gotten anything out of me or walking with my Spirit, then I want your joy to be the same as my joy. And my joy was going to the cross. And you can fulfill that joy by being like-minded with me, because he says he's given us his mind. We have the mind of Christ if we have the Spirit. We have his love, which is unconditional. And being of one accord, that means walk in hand, and of one mind. He repeats it. So in verse 3 of Philippians 2, he says that nothing be done out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each person esteem others better than himself. And so Jesus has given us the tools to have victory when we get to this situation where it's me or somebody else. And our natural man is going to choose to protect me, and the supernatural man is going to step aside and say, no, it's not you first. It's others first. It's having the mind of Jesus. It's counting the joy of suffering for their covering, for their salvation. So count each or esteem each other better than themselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. So this guy, the Levite, had a choice. Self-preservation or my concubine. And he chose self-preservation, and he released her. It says he rejected her, or he cast her into the crowd. And we got to admit, if we haven't spent time walking out this scenario, we don't know how we're going to respond when it comes down to that. Because as soon as our self or our life or our reputation or our finances are challenged, it's easy to go into self-preservation mode. I'm going to lose it all if I don't react. We can go into, I'm going to do it right in my own eyes and worry about the consequences later. Because we're good, just like the Levite is good, at justifying anything. Well, you know, the situation was this. And in our brains, the situation is reconcocted to get ourselves out of harm's way, to make it look like we were doing the best we could do in the situation at hand. And our brain skews the whole truth, and now we have a new truth, and we've done right and according to our eyes of what the truth or the perceived truth really is, when it has nothing to really look like the truth. And so we can push people out and cast them off or reject them very easily. Now, we may not be feeding them to a mob of sodomizers, but it may feel like that to them. They'd be like, man, I'd rather it be physical than the emotional abuse you just put me through by casting me off and rejecting me because it doesn't fit in your self-preservation mode, because your story that you've written in your head looks different from the actual truth of the story. And so we got to say, God, I need to know truth. I need to know how this really played out in my heart and in my head so that I know the story in your truth, which will probably look better, different than our truth. And if we predetermine what that's going to look like, we won't have that reaction. And so our prayer is, God, we want to see all things through truth. We want to see all things through your lens. We want to see it according to what your story is, not according to the story we're going to make up. Because as we justify, we can justify pushing people away or rejecting people or casting people off because they don't look like us in our religious box. Oh, that person's weird. I'm just going to reject that. Well, is it all weird, or is it just that little piece that's weird? Do they know Jesus? Are they searching for the truth of Jesus? And is that little weird piece just going to have you reject them? Or if somebody steps on our pain or our wound, man, we're really quick of just reacting and pushing that person away. I ain't got no time for that. I don't want to even deal with that. You've got no place in my life. You're dead to me. And we reject and we cast off instead of dealing with the wound that required that kind of response. Or they don't simply look like us or act like us or have a belief system that lines up perfectly with our belief system. And so we just go through predetermining and prejudging. You're accepted in my little world. You're rejected in my little bubble. And we just go through and we make these predetermined situations. And God's like, are you asking? Are you looking through my eyes? Are you seeing this according to your story or according to my story? So hold that thought. We'll come back to it. So the next day, after supposedly the Levite got a good night's sleep, verse 27, he gets up. Her master rises up in the morning, and when he opens the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine laying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, get up, let's go. Get up, we must be going. But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went to his home. We entered his house. He took a knife, and taking hold of the concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. This dude has completely checked out emotionally. We've already heard his justification story. But when he gets up the next morning, he is completely detached. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to act like it never happened. He tells the concubine to get going. We got to get home. And we realize that she's not responding. He just throws her on the donkey. Because we got to get home. We got a schedule to keep. So we already see that he's blamed Gibeah for this whole encounter. His servant's probably going, dude, if you had just stayed in Jerusalem. The father's saying, if you had just stayed at my house one more day. But he's taken the sidestep and he's blaming Gibeah for the death of his concubine. He's taken no responsibility for it. And he's basically emotionally detached himself from the whole situation. And we're going to talk about next week why he divides her into 12 pieces and sends her throughout Israel. But let's focus real quick on the last words of this chapter. After the people go, man, nothing ever this crazy has happened. Now, have we seen crazy in the book of Judges? We've seen some crazy. The Israelites are blown away by crazy here because they're living crazy. Their life is crazy. It's chaos. It's confusion. It's everybody doing what's right in their own eyes. And they're kind of aghast going, man, we've never seen something this crazy. The guys at Cedar are like, why is this even in the Bible? I'm like, yeah, right? But after they're aghast at what's going on, the Bible says, consider it, take counsel, and speak. Consider it basically means think about it. Like, we just want to dismiss the story. We just don't want, look, can we move on? Could you not have combined 2 chapters in 1 week and we just skip this really didn't happen and find out the outcome of it? No, because the Bible says consider this, think about this, ponder this, meditate on this. And we're like, we don't want to do that. Then it says counsel or confer. It means discuss it. And we're like, dude, I don't even want to think about it, much less talk about it with somebody. Well, the Bible says, I want you to think about it, and I want you to talk about it. And in that talking, it's not just talking about how horrible it is. It actually means talk with counsel to make a plan. Because what's our plan going to look like by ourselves versus what's that plan going to look like with other people around us? When we go into self-preservation mode, we can justify anything. That's why it says, as you think about this, make a plan with accountability. Because then when we start justifying, they're like, whoa, 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 you're justifying. Back up, consider it, make the plan, and then speak it. Speak it is kind of twofold. It means speak it as you walk it out. It's put it into action. It's not just think about it, make a plan, and then hope for the best. It's as you think about it, as you make a plan with accountability, with a group of people, walk it out. What's that going to look like? It's going to look like us not putting ourselves first. It's going to look like us putting ourselves out there. It's going to look like us not just rejecting people because they look different, but embracing a relationship to walk in truth with love with them. And our self-preservation mode is screaming everything, do not do that. That's why we need this accountability, this conferring together, this counsel. Because we're going to get pushed back to that several times. It's not going to just be oh man, I thought about it, I made a plan, and I enacted that plan, victory. It's going to be opposition. It's a war. Because the enemy does not just want us to engage that. He wants to bring everything against that so we can go, hey, I tried. We come back to our accountability of the group and they say, no, no, no. Keep going. Keep walking it out. Keep fighting it. Speak it. Live it. Breathe it. So we got to think about this story. We got to get a plan according to the story, and then we got to walk out the story. I think each one of those is difficult in its own way. And the only way we're going to do that is supernaturally. So, as we wrap up, a commentator made a very good point about this entire story, which I totally didn't catch until he brought it up. Did you notice in this story that nobody has a name? Nobody's got a name. We got a father or a father-in-law. We got a concubine. We got a Levite. We got the men of Gibeah. We got an old dude from Ephraim. We got an old dude's daughter who's a virgin. Nobody's got a name. Why is that? Because it's so much easier to live life with these kind of crazy things happening in an anonymous world. Right? I mean, if we just go on and say, man, it's about some Levite that's got a concubine whose father-in-law gets involved, and then they go to this old man's house, and the old man gets surrounded by the mob, and the mob just goes crazy, and he feeds his concubine to the thing, and the virgin's spared, but the Levite, he has to divide her up and send her off to the tribes, and nobody's got a name, then we can go, man, that's just a messed up story, but it's not very personal, so I got no responsibility. But what if each one of these people had a name? What if each one of these people had a name that you personally knew? Yeah, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. Anonymity allows us to do what's right in our own eyes. But putting a name and a face on it does not allow us to do whatever we feel is right in our own eyes. It does not allow us to put ourselves first. Now, in an anonymous story, it's easy to put ourselves first, because I know me, and I know I care more about me than anonymous people. But if I start personalizing these stories, if I start personalizing these people that I'm rejecting, either as a whole group, or as individuals, or as a denomination, or fill in the blank, unless I personalize that, I will never get the full impact of seeing the situation the way God sees it. Because God doesn't see a people group. God doesn't see anonymous people. God sees hearts. And you got to admit, in our society, we love to put it into an anonymous storyline. Our community puts it into an anonymous storyline. The church. Those people. So we do the same thing. That city. That people group. That church over there. And everybody becomes nameless faces that we can take or leave. But God says, I want you to put names to the faces, and I want you to put stories to the names. And that's why he says, I want you to consider this. I want you to walk away from the story. I want you to consider this. I want you to get into groups and talk about it. Get a plan, be accountable, and then walk it out. Because this is about individuals with names, with stories. And God wants us to start stepping into those stories. He wants us to start stepping into those nameless faces and find out what their names are. He wants us to stop saying them or those people. And he wants us to make it personal. And when it gets personal, guess what? It gets messy. It gets complicated. I don't know how this lines up with my theological doctrines. But God says, okay, that's a crisis of belief. Let's walk it out. But we just want to bail. We don't want to take the time to figure out how it all fits together. We just want to say, I just don't want to do that. We reject it, we cast it off, and we go a different direction to find out somebody with a name and a face and a story that fits more into our bubble. And God says, I want that to stop. Because every person with a face, with a story, is uniquely made by me in my image. They're struggling, they're sinning, they're hurting. They kind of look like us. We're struggling, we're sinning, we're hurting. But we know these names, right? So we're in love with these names. We're in love with these stories. And God says there's more. Step outside. You say, okay, Jim, I do this. I consider it. I get people around me and I counsel and I get a plan because I already know who I'm supposed to be doing it with. And I speak it, I walk it out, and I panic. What do? You go back to the beginning of the service with Jill's testimony. I'm in panic. I'm in fear. What do? I got one name. I got one name that's above every name. I got one name that only can bring victory to a situation. I got one name that the darkness has to flee. I got one name that only brings truth to a situation. I got one thing. Bring that. What do I do after that? I don't know. But Jesus said, that's enough. You don't have to defend him. You don't have to explain him. You don't have to prove that he exists. You just have to bring the name. Our responsibility is to bring Jesus into everybody's story. Our responsibility is to forgive, to stop rejecting and casting off, so that we will consider, we will plan, and we will go. Because I tell you what, if I get burned by this people group, the last thing I want to do is enter into that people group again. And God says, that's the very thing I want you to do. So I got to bring forgiveness to that in my heart before I can step back into that situation. Bring Jesus into the story. And then tell your story. Don't tell your testimony. When I was 6, tell your story today. Tell the messy parts. Tell the hurt. Tell the confusion. Tell the doubt. Tell the sin. Don't glorify it. Just tell the truth. Bring genuineness to the situation as you bring Jesus, and let God put names on faces and bring stories into it. This video is going to encourage us to do that.